yesterday when Venerable Jigme was talking about imperfection, made me think about my retreat this winter and some things. Yeah, I'm continuing that. The imperfection in that regard is continuing. But it made me think about some things that I had read that were a big part of my retreat, and something I've been coming back to quite often. I think this kind of started in a way during a retreat some years ago, when I found a lot of benefit in this line in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where he said, attune the mind to accepting others. And I try to make that part of my practice, which is, of course, a practice, a work in progress. And that was very helpful to me. And somewhere along the line, I realized that it's self-acceptance that's kind of the bigger problem, and what somewhat underlies not being able to accept others a lot of times. And then I just, at some point in the retreat, decided I really want to try to go deeper with this. And I remembered a friend of ours who used to live here, a book that he found very helpful. And so I wanted to share some of the ideas in that were very helpful to my mind. And one of the biggest ones is this thought that I come back to is, why am I not enjoying myself and what I'm doing right now? This is, when my mind goes into this certain place that I think we all in our Western culture do, and I consider it to be in the realm of where we're denigrating ourselves with not having the proper kind of integrity or aware. So we have low self-esteem because we're not holding on to our integrity in the right way. I kind of come back to those lines. And for myself, exploring in this book kind of how that happens, a couple ideas really were helpful. So why can't I relax in the moment, enjoy who I am and what I'm doing, and why is my mind in certain moments not able to be like curious or loving or open? There's certain parts in where that happens for me, and this thing around not feeling good enough comes up. And so it was very helpful for me to realize that it's really helpful, the psychological aspect of it. And for me, that's incredibly helpful. And then to put it in a Dharma perspective. So one 7th century Zen master taught that true freedom is being without anxiety about imperfection. And when he talked about this, what he meant was that our whole experience as being humans, our human existence and all of life, imperfection is part of it. It's not a personal problem. It's kind of like, this is what dukkha is about. This is like the first noble truth in a way. And so for me, that's very broadening for my mind, because when you're in that place mentally, you are the center of the universe. And you don't really get that, hey, all of human existence, and probably more, but at least human existence has this problem. This is not a personal problem. It's a part of existing, is what he said. And so that's quite a different perspective, that really broadens things out. So one way of kind of going on the psychological side is this book has a lot of that in it. One story that was told, this thing of how we get kind of stuck. That's kind of a stuck place, and we live for years in some of these stuck places. I recognize that. And so this one story was quite powerful for me, that the author told about this white regal tiger named Mohini, who had lived for many years at the Washington, D.C. National Zoo. And for most of those years, her home was in the old lion house, a 12 by 12 foot cage with iron bars and a cement floor. And this beautiful tiger spent her days pacing back and forth and making like maybe even a circle in there in these cramped quarters. And so eventually biologists and the zoo park staff and whatever, they made this natural habitat for her. And this covered several acres, and it had hills, trees, a pond, variety of vegetation. And they had all this excitement and anticipation. Can't say the word. They were very excited to release her into this new environment and home, but it was too late. The tiger sought a refuge in a corner of this compound, and she lived the rest of her life there, pacing a 12-foot area, 12 by, and that was like, boom. This is the stuckness that we can find in our own minds, and how tragic that is. And one other quote that I don't know, I find these kind of metaphors very helpful sometimes. This is from D.H. Lawrence, also in this book, and because a lot of this, I think, because His Holiness was so surprised by the amount of self-hatred that we have in our Western society. And so there's a cultural aspect to some of these things, obviously, but some of it is much bigger than that. But D.H. Lawrence said something about our Western culture, which I found to be kind of a great metaphor in a certain aspect. It's like our Western culture is like a great uprooted tree with its roots in the air. We are perishing for a lack of fulfillment of our greater needs. We are cut off from the great source of our inward nourishment and renewal. And this is what that state of mind is like, I'd say. It doesn't know how to take care of itself and get outside of this. And so, this thing around self-acceptance and learning to be able to look at that is quite important, and sometimes you need help. Personally, I needed help with this. Years ago, I went to therapy for a while, and one of the biggest things I learned there is one of the parts in this book that I haven't really quite gotten to yet, but I've scanned it a little bit, is this thing of pausing. Like, for a lot of us, it's some of these things, there's so much cognitive dissonance, do you know what I mean? They're so uncomfortable that we are out of there so quickly that we don't even know what's going on with ourselves. And so when we start with the Buddhist practice and we start to become more aware of what's going on with ourselves, it can be kind of challenging. But the whole beautiful thing about this is to be able to learn how to embrace this. For, as Carl Rogers said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And I think that's what most of us find, is that there has to come this level. But putting it in a Dharma way, Venerable Chodron spoke about this once, and she mentioned Milarepa, and I was like very puzzled by that. So I recently spent some time looking at his 100,000 songs. So, Milarepa became enlightened in one lifetime after murdering 40 people or something with hailstorms. So I don't think we're quite in his ballpark. But what he was getting at, I think, is kind of important. So, if you read these stories about him, basically, a lot of times when they bring up shame, he was like running around naked. Well, that doesn't quite work in our society, and we don't need to go do that to get rid of our shame. But really, a part of his practice was, he says at one point there's an interchange with someone who's kind of like this perfect monk, doing things in a perfect way, and he kind of says, well, my teaching is a little different. In it, if one feels he has nothing to be ashamed of, that will be sufficient. So then I was questioning, well, what is he meaning by this? So I read through, luckily I could search it with a, search engine. And he basically, he says at another time, in another story, he says, why, oh my good lad, do you take things without shame to be shameful? I cannot understand the so-called shame of yours. Of the really shameful things, you are most ignorant. And this is the kind of, I think, one of our problems is when we don't have kind of the Dharma perspective or even a certain kind of values or understanding. We're shameful. We have, shame for the wrong things. And when you look at what Milarepa was talking about, he talks about where he gets his self-respect. And he definitely talks about being ashamed of things, but it's things that are like well, in his words, I have no self-made shameful feelings. so he doesn't put this stuff on himself that we are doing when we do our low self-esteem trip or some of these things. His shame relates to things that are like harming others, or not respectful of the Dharma, or, you know, they're very much in the Dharma world. So when he talks about how I keep my self-respect, for him it's all, because basically the story is he's walking around naked and this young guy's like, hey, you need to cover yourself, you know. And there's a lot of times where this comes up, like he has no shame. He's this mad ascetic who knows not disgrace and shame. And, you know, that was his level. He didn't need clothes. He didn't need all these things. But then he did this, and the guy wanted to give him a pair of trousers, which he wouldn't take. He says, let me tell you how I keep my self-respect. My fine wool, talking about the wool of a pair of trousers, is the heart for Bodhi, is bodhicitta, with which I spin the thread of the 4 initiations, which I take as his part of his Dharma practice, let's put it that way. The cloth I weave is the liberation path of samadhi, and the dye I use is made of virtues and good wishes. My tailor uncle is the sense of conscientious discretion, by whom the trousers of self-respect are made. These are my dignified and altruistic trousers, and so of yours I have no need. Dear patron, you may now go home. Okay, so we're not going to be Milarepa walking around naked, but the basic idea is that he had this sense of integrity that was a big part of his practice, and he didn't, you know, he got beyond putting these things on himself that weren't really meant, that aren't shameful by nature, but we turn them into that. And so I think that's what I think we find when we pause, and with the guidance that we need, with the help that we need. I don't think a lot of people can't come to this on their own. They need some kind of guidance and help. But I think these are kind of ways to help us combine our practice with some of the tools that are out there. So enjoy.